Hey friends, and welcome back to the Adventures of Blink. I am of course Blink, and you can find me on GitHub right here. Before we dig into today's adventure, if you get something good out of this, if you learn from it, if you think it's interesting, please let me know by hitting the like button. That gives me the feedback to understand where the good stuff is and what maybe I missed the mark with. Also, click subscribe so that you don't miss any upcoming adventures. I want to make sure you're along for the ride as we go explore more things. Uh, so, anyway, today's adventure is actually going to be a little bit more of a discussion than it's going to be a build. But it's something that I think is really important, and it's really relevant to this topic of Git that we've been on this season. We're going to discuss a concept called GitOps. GitOps is a strategy where we manage all of our applications' operations, ops, using Git. And that's how we got the name. We achieve GitOps by ensuring that everything in our system, from the infrastructure to the application to even the data, is all configured in some way from files that live in our Git repository. The ideal here is that we have the ability to create our entire system from that repository. That we can go from zero to a fully functional application system in short order and with little to no manual effort, because we're using the automation that we've learned about over the last few weeks. So why would we want to employ a strategy of GitOps anyway? Like, what would drive us to do that? The obvious first thing that pops into my head is that anything that's automatic saves us work. And so rather than spending an all-nighter trying to deploy a system during launch week, I can get to the point where I'm comfortable with automation doing the deployment. And so then it's press a button and we know that the system will take care of it, and it will always be consistent, and it will always do exactly what we expected it to do. The next thing that I'd want to talk about is eliminating drift. So drift is the situation where the configuration of a system or a server or something like that changes over time, but does it in a way that's not documented, where we can't go back on it. We used to run into this all the time in old style operations before this automation was widely available, because people would make changes to systems spur of the moment because they're trying to solve a quick problem, and then they would forget about it. And it would not come up again until the next major release deployment came out, and suddenly we had this really unexpected problem and nobody knew why, and we'd spend days trying to find out what happened, only to find that there was a configuration setting that wasn't the way we expected it to be. So that can be a serious problem. It increases the chance that our system can't be restored on the first try. So it also affects situations like disaster recovery, where if your entire system has completely gone down and you have to recover from backup, do you know that that backup is going to come up and start working immediately? Or is there going to be some sort of extra configuration fiddling that you have to do to get it working again? And that's a problem, because usually in a disaster recovery scenario, you're under the gun. You need to get it done immediately, and you don't have time to sort out all these random configuration changes that might have occurred. So that's kind of, the technical reasons for GitOps. There's one other one that stands out to me, and that's if you're required to provide security and compliance information. So, certain audits and things that you might be subject to require you to document the configuration of a system and adhere to that configuration. Well, drift is a natural result of people coming in and making random changes to the system and not documenting it. So now all of your audit documentation is always out of date, and there's always something wrong that needs to be remediated. That can be a problem, particularly in the more stringent audits that require you to do things in a very short order. Like they need to be fixed quickly if there's something out of line. You don't have time to go find all these random configurations when the auditor shows up. So if I want to embrace GitOps, I have to adopt a few mantras. First, never do anything deployment related by hand. Use an existing tool or script a new one. If I'm logging into a UI and clicking on options in a console, or even if I'm just changing settings, on a command line someplace, I've done things that weren't part of my automation. I should never make a change to a system through my own work. I should always make the automation that makes the change to the system, because that way I've got it automatically documented and I can put that automation into my process so that it happens the same way every time. It's captured forever. The next mantra would be to increase the frequency of our deployments. Deployments tend to instill some fear in us because we worry about whether they'll work right. And this has been the case for operations for years uncounted now, that we don't like change because change usually means things break. The antidote to this fear is practice. It's about getting in the habit of deploying our code so often that it's become second nature and we don't even think about the fact that we're making changes to production. We can just push things and we trust that the automation takes care of it. Now, if you work in a big organization, you probably have some people who want you to do paperwork every time you push code to production. It's just the way we've always operated because that was how we controlled the risk before. See, back in the day, we would say, okay, you need to have a code move approved by some body of people. Like there's some group of people who have to come in and give you approval to do this. And so you would fill out your form and you would present it at the meeting and you would say, I need to move this code. And you would wait for the blessing of the poobah to wave his shaky stick at you or whatever. And he says, okay, you can move your code. And so then you get to go do it. The problem we run into when we try to increase deployments is that means we're automatically increasing the paperwork. We've created this environment where it's impossible to move faster because we're so busy documenting it, and we've forgotten that the reason we documented it like that was to protect ourselves from extreme change. And now we're trying to promote extreme change. So it's really important to take this apart and think of it differently. That what we're doing is building automation that can move code without affecting production. That sounds a little weird because isn't the point of the new code to affect production? But we're separating the concept of releasing code from deploying code. Releasing code means putting it in a way that the customer can start using it, that people can actually get to it. Deploying code just means making sure it's actually on the server. So this is a concept called feature flagging that we can introduce. This isn't really part of the scope of today's discussion, but it's really important to this, and you should probably make a little tag there that says we're going to go back and do feature flagging. Go back and look at some of the prior adventures of Blink. I think I've made some notes about feature flags before. I'll try to leave some links below to help you along the way there. But that's the kind of thing that we have to start thinking about. We're going to change practices that require us to change other practices, that require us to change other practices. And we are fundamentally altering the way that we deliver software. And it starts with Git. So those are our two mantras to consider. Never do a deployment step by hand, always automate it, and increase the frequency of your deployments so that you're not afraid to do them as much. When you do these two things in conjunction, you start to build a delivery machine. And suddenly your developers can focus on, hey, I got to get this thing to work, and I'm going to push it out the door as soon as it's working. And you get into a cycle where you actually deliver more productively. So there's a productivity boost in here for a team to consider. And you should definitely try to keep that at the forefront of any discussions you're having with management. Okay, so we talked about why we would want to do this, and then we talked about how to do it, but what could possibly go wrong? That's what we should consider next. The first thing to keep in mind is that GitOps isn't really free. We're having to learn a new discipline. It's a way of thinking about things, and to be fair about it, automation is not always easy to do. Like the first time you automate something, it can be a really difficult process. And there's going to be a learning curve. You're going to move slower than you want to. And it's going to be hard to resist that temptation to just be like, you know what, we can knock this out in 5 seconds. Let's do it. It, it always comes back to that mantra of making sure that we automate first and we know that we're doing it with the big picture in mind. So keep that in mind that you are going to slow down a little bit as you adopt this journey. Things are not going to go as quickly as you expect them to because you're having to learn a new skill. It's like going to the gym for the first time. You don't start off with huge muscles. You start off with little wimpy muscles, and you have to kind of grow them through repeated practice and preparation. So keep that in mind. The next thing that you would want to consider is that secrets management is going to be extremely tricky. It continues to be, even for the experienced folks who do GitOps things all the time. We run into this constant problem where we know we need credentials to do certain work. And if you're going to automate, then the automation needs access to those credentials. But you can't just put your credentials in Git. That's a terrible idea because now those credentials are exposed to anyone with access to the repo. How do you handle it? Well, I've seen a couple of different ways. There's one to consider, like from the Ruby perspective, where your credentials are actually stored in the project, but they're kept in an encrypted file so that there's no way to access the credential itself. Ruby is the only way that you can do that. And then you keep a special key outside that you can use to give people access. You can give them access to the key. That's a possibility. The other way that we see a lot of apps use this is through some sort of external secrets vault. I know like HashiCorp has a vault that's really well respected. There's a couple other products along the way that are like that, where you just need an external place to store the secrets, and then you give the system access to go get them and use them. But it's always a tricky thing to set up, and there's a lot of care that needs to be taken in establishing that workflow. So those are the big gotchas that'll come into the GitOps discussion. Well, I think we've kind of seen the entire GitOps experience, even if it's only been at a conceptual level where we're just sort of discussing the idea today. Um, I would like for you to take away from this that you need to go back and look at your systems and think, what would it take if I wanted to redeploy this entire system from scratch? And start listing out some of the steps that you might have to go through. Well, we want to automate the build of the application. But in order to automate the build of the application, we have to have infrastructure for it to run on. So how do we automate the creation of the infrastructure? What happens as you go layer by layer down in through the process? And this is going to feel overwhelming at first because you're going to look at it and you're going to say, in order to do this, I basically have to build the whole universe from scratch. Not necessarily. There's a lot of ways that you can shortcut. There's a lot of places you can make a decision about what's valuable to do automation with. Not everything in the universe needs to be automated. There is an eventual barrier you reach where you say, that's as far as I'm willing to go because there's diminishing returns for going beyond it. So keep that in mind. And then once you have your list, you can challenge yourself to pick out one small part and GitOpsify that. How do I make sure that this configuration is in a Git repository and it's available to be pushed via automation? And if you do that with each step, gradually you're going to work your way through the system to the point that you have a lot more of your automation handled than you do today. It's a long journey, and it requires you to be persistent. So stick with it. It's not going to feel glamorous and sexy and like right out of the gate. It's going to be a slog at times, but it's worth it. So that wraps up another adventure of Blink. I'm glad that you came along with me for the journey. And in fact, this sort of closes up our arc of exploring Git. Yeah, I know this is episode 9 and we've got one more in this season, but I decided I'd do something a little different and fun and off topic, so to speak. So, even though this season has been all about source control and being able to understand how Git and GitHub and GitLab work, we're going to do something entertaining and different next week. So, make sure you hit subscribe, and that way you won't miss it. We'll see you next time.